Hello again, and here we are now for APUSH review, periods 4 and 5. So let's start off with our essential questions for this period 4. So this one's about westward migration in the beginning. So how did westward migration lead to political and social conflicts domestically with foreign powers, with Native Americans? How were competing conceptions of national and regional identity expressed in the development of political institutions and cultural values after the War of 1812? How did the Industrial Revolution, now this is the first Industrial Revolution in America, shape labor systems, society, and workers' lives? How did enslaved African Americans develop a sense of group identity and resist the institution of slavery? Well, getting into period 4, again, this is the years 1800 to 1848. Again, as I've been telling you, try your best to associate the actual time frame with the period as well. This will help you greatly when you go to write essays, short answers, and DBQs. Now, Americans are beginning to dominate the continent. It's their manifest destiny is taking place. And they do this through a variety of means, one of which is military action. An example of that would be War of 1812, all the way to, we go from 1812, you have 1848 range here. So 1846, 1848 is the Mexican-American War. Diplomatic efforts, a great example of that is the Monroe Doctrine. This eventually, again, as they're going west, as they're fulfilling their manifest destiny, it brings more resistance from state governments in the North and in the South. It's interesting to think that we think of only Southern states that were always arguing over states' rights, but during the War of 1812, Northern states were arguing over states' rights. The New England states, the last bastion of the Federalist Party. In fact, those Federalists, many of them became traitors, became blue light Federalists, and supported the British during the War of 1812. If you remember, they had their Hartford Convention, where they were eventually going to, at one point, they were threatening to secede from the Union and join Canada. I guess they needed more Canadian bacon and maple syrup. I don't know, maybe. It didn't work out well for them. They decided not to do that, thankfully, but They go to Washington anyways to list their grievances, and it turned out terrible for them. And it's the death knell of the Federalist Party. Of course, the southern states are the ones that we know the most about resisting federal government and eventually leading to, a civil war. Of course, a new national culture emerges. Art, architecture, literature. We get the Hudson River School of Art develops. We have the Knickerbocker group of writers, your Washington Irving, who writes a series of books. One that's famous that you know is the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, right? The Headless Horseman. A lot of us know that particular story that he writes, but these are first time you get a lot of Americans writing American stories. James Fenimore Cooper writes The Last of the Mohegans. So a new type of an American art, architecture, literature. This is all coming out of the War of 1812 as well. So a real American identity is starting to take shape at this time period. The Federalist Party, as we just said, they fade away because of the War of 1812. We think the Jeffersonian Republicans, that's why we call this an era of good feelings. They're the only party left, but they're really two parties, National Republicans and Democratic Republicans, and eventually they morph into the two parties that we know, Democrats with Andrew Jackson and the Whigs with Henry Clay. And they're both fighting for what they believe is the national identity of America. Of course, the Whigs want a national America. They want the American system. They want to protect textile industries, so they want high tariffs. They want new inventions like steam engines to interconnect us from one state to another easier, make travel quicker, so we're really a real connected group of people now with steamships on the canals that are being built, interchangeable parts, railroads eventually, and eventually the telegraph. All this is part of the American system. Of course, they bring back a second Bank of the United States in order to finance this, and that puts them at odds with the Jacksonian Democrats, who again are very strict states' righters. And the Southerners are always sticking towards their agriculture. Of course, women are affected this time period. A lot of women are entering into the workforce for the first time ever. The Lowell factory girls is the best example of that, and we've talked a lot about that in class. A market economy is developing at the same time. You've got the American system out there, the market economy, a new industrial revolution is taking place, a new type of national identity with art and writing. All this is happening all around the same time period. It's a very fascinating time period in American history. Of course, what starts to happen, though, where they think they're going to create this really national America, regional, political, and economic loyalties take over. The South stays loyal to the South. States' rights, people stay loyal to states' rights. This begins to overshadow all national concerns. Slavery, the national bank, tariffs, internal improvements become the main arguments between the Whigs and the Democrats. Democrats see these as strict states' rights issues, and they feel the government has no role in this whatsoever, whereas the Whigs want the government to take an active role. Always remember that Southern cotton is the backbone of the American economy at this time period. And another great thing is happening all in this time period, the Second Great Awakening, this massive religious movement. It's a religious movement to bring back that old-time faithful religion. They had felt that Americans were getting too influenced by the expanding market revolution. They were losing their religious zeal. These massive outside revivals, mostly in the New England area, upstate New York, parts of Pennsylvania, into Illinois and Indiana, Ohio. So much preaching was taking place that they began to refer to this as the burnt over districts, all that hellfire that they were talking about, trying to get people back to the churches. But the biggest important thing about the Second Great Awakening, and this is in red because this is my commentary here, this is not actually in the key concepts, but you should know it created this massive social reform movement. The two that are mentioned, abolition and the women's suffrage, women's rights movement that begins. But there's also temperance, education reform, prison and asylum reform, transcendentalist, and people trying to build utopian societies. All that's taking place here. A lot of people are talking about various emancipation plans, perhaps gradual emancipation for slaves. Some want immediate emancipation, like William Lloyd Garrison, a white abolitionist who begins to fight for the immediate emancipation of black slaves. Frederick Douglass, a former slave himself, who is a free man. Frederick Douglass is a free black man living in America. But remember, the restrictions on African Americans who are free, they're never going to be citizens of the United States because of color. Much as women aren't citizens of the United States either because of gender. Again, here's the North embracing technology and improvement. The South is clinging to its economy, its pro-agrarian heritage. You throw in the Louisiana Purchase at this time period. Jefferson doubles the size of the United States overnight in 1804, and that led to more Western migration, more expanding of both industry and eventually even Southern agriculture. Southern agriculture will go into Missouri. Missouri will want to come in as a slave state, which is in the Louisiana territory. That led to a lot of confrontation and one of Henry Clay's compromises. Of course, as we noted, Henry Clay actually did not come up with the Missouri Compromise, but he gets all the credit for it because, he's Henry Clay. He did have a tariff compromise of 1833, trying to avoid a nullification crisis that took place in South Carolina. South Carolina didn't like paying tariffs anymore, and they started threatening to nullify law, and Andrew Jackson threatened to burn South Carolina to the ground, and we get a tariff compromise comes out of this. The United States is also, again, pressing for continental dominance, using military actions, again, judicial decisions, diplomatic efforts. So again, here's a second time in your key concepts that it mentions how America wants to dominate the continent using either military or diplomatic efforts. That's in there twice. Probably important to know. Here are some examples that you could use, again, when writing essays, short answers, DBQs, the Embargo Act, the "oh, grab me" moment of Thomas Jefferson, two Supreme Court cases there, Marbury versus Madison and Maryland versus McCulloch. Good things to look up for yourself. If you don't know what those are, much of these here you probably know what they are or who they are. William Lloyd Garrison, I was mentioning him earlier. They often quote his magazine called The Liberator. It's often quoted in the exams, and if you can't find the quote, just ask me and I'll help you out with that. Look at there's Cult of Domesticity, Seneca Falls, Declaration of Sentiments, all this wonderful, wonderful outside information you could use in writing essays. Wow, that's just wonderful. All right, period 5. How did the concept of manifest destiny contribute to a changing culture and identity in the United States? How did it also bring about the failures of compromise that ultimately led to the Civil War? How did the Civil War change the United States? And how did debates over political values such as democracy, freedom, and citizenship contribute to ideological clashes during Reconstruction? So that's this period. Manifest destiny, Civil War, Reconstruction. So there's your manifest destiny. I think by now we pretty much know what this is. But it also, because America's going west, they have all this land that they're acquiring after the war with Mexico. It attracted more immigrants. America doesn't always like immigrants, even though America is a country of immigrants. And it led to a rise of what we call nativism. The Know Nothing Party has developed a political party that was anti-immigrant at this time period. Here we got your constant debates over slavery because of manifest destiny. You've got the North and its industry, the South, its agrarian culture. Compromise has fallen apart. They tried the Compromise of 1850, that 8-part Henry Clay desire to avert civil war, all because gold is discovered in California, and California wants to come as a free state. So he comes up with this various complex plan of compromise, and eventually it worked for a little bit, but hey, the Civil War happens. Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Dred Scott decision. Remember, the decision of that Supreme Court case decided that the Fifth Amendment protects property, and slaves are property. Thereby, the Missouri Compromise, according to the Supreme Court of this time period, the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional. Slavery can exist anywhere in the United States. These are the things that begin to just inflame people in the North towards people in the South. It's pretty obvious we're heading towards a civil war. A new Republican Party that's a free soil party. They believe in free soil. They want the land that is acquired from Mexico to remain free, no slavery on it. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 is what is a major catalyst then for the Civil War. The South believes he is going to end slavery, which he really never intended to do. And one by one, they begin to break away. And finally, in April 1861, they fire shots at Fort Sumter off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, starting the Civil War. Of course, here's everything you need to really know about the Civil War. You got this expanding economy, free labor, manufacturing economy, contrasting again with the South's agrarian style. The various strategies of resisting slavery, right? African Americans begin to resist slavery going into just before the Civil War. They have their fierce arguments. They help slaves escape through the Underground Railroad. They even resort to violence, like John Brown and his raid on Harper's Ferry, for states' rights, nullifications. All these things are part of what leads up to the Civil War. And this is in the concepts, and I highlight it for a reason. Why does the South hold on to their slavery? One is of their Southern apologist theory, defending slavery as a positive good. Of course, the North had all the manpower, they had all the leadership, they have all the industry, It still took them 4 years, but they do wind up winning this war against the Confederacy. Lincoln issues an Emancipation Proclamation. And again, it's a wartime order only. And it doesn't free really anyone. Right? It's only directed at states in open rebellion. So border states, southern states that stayed loyal to the Union, he didn't take away their slaves. And any slaves that might have been in the North or might have been in the Western territories, nobody's freed. But it sets up the working mechanism to eventually help get Congress to pass the 13th Amendment. Civil War and Reconstruction obviously alters power relations between the states, the federal government. Everything winds up changing in American politics because of this. The radical Republicans wind up gaining control of Congress. There's a power change between Congress and the presidency with Lincoln's assassination. They do not like Andrew Johnson, and Congress winds up taking control of the government basically throughout what will the next period we know as the Gilded Age. Your 14th and 15th Amendments, you must know those. All right? Your right to citizenship, your right to vote. Of course, it angers women because there's no mention of gender references in either the 14th or the 15th Amendments. And again, here are some wonderful, wonderful examples you could use for essays, short answers, DBQs. I'll keep saying that, and hopefully you'll eventually understand why these things are important. Again, if you don't know any of these individuals or you don't remember them or some of these events, we have a textbook. Hey, surprise! It's not just there for collecting dust. Yay, textbooks. All right, I'll see everybody later. Bye-bye.